Kia ora, everyone. It's nice to be here and nice to be back at the Roadshow. As Justin mentioned, my name is Anchali Anandanayagam, and I'm a partner at Hudson Gavin Martin. For those of you who don't know Hudson Gavin Martin, we're a corporate, commercial, and litigation law firm focused on very specific areas, which are technology, media, and intellectual property. So I spend my days advising people with relationships, but those relationships are based around technology, media, and telecommunications assets. And as you can imagine, more and more, those relationships also have built into them an element of AI. So it is something that we're seeing a lot more and advising a lot more on. Now, this talk, the title of the session, AI Ready or AI Exposed, was intentional. The question isn't whether AI is impacting your business or is being used within your business or your organization. The real question is, are you prepared? Are you positioned in a good way to be able to manage and use the tools effectively and safely, or actually whether your organization is inadvertently exposing itself to risk that can be controlled for and that can be mitigated. So this talk, I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes taking you through some risks, because I think it is important to talk about the risks, but I'm also well aware that the risk conversation has been happening for some time, and the challenges of the tool you should be aware of these things, but we are going to cover them. But I also want to spend a bit of time to give you some practical tools and takeaways for your organizations to start helping to manage and mitigate those risks, so you can use the tools and scale up as we've been talking about today. So, in terms of the content, uh, before we get into it, I just wanted to provide a brief overview of the regulatory framework in New Zealand. You'll be aware probably that we do not have AI-specific regulation in New Zealand. What we do have is existing laws that are tech-agnostic and therefore apply to your use of AI and how AI tools are used within your businesses. I've listed some of the key laws up there. So Fair Trading Act, so relevant if AI outputs are being used and they mislead either your customers or your stakeholders or the consumers that you're working with, that's going to bite. Privacy Act, obviously, again, another tech agnostic piece of legislation. So if you're collecting, using, sharing, uploading personal information into AI tools, this is going to be relevant. This act is going to be relevant. Now, IP law is absolutely critical in this space as well. Obviously, copyright is particularly being stretched, okay, in terms of both what the tools are being trained on, but also their outputs and how those outputs are being used. And finally, I think from a governance perspective, boards of directors and leaders, this is a critical risk area and should be featuring on your risk alongside cyber, alongside all the other risks that are particular to your business context. So incredibly important. So I will be talking about 3 key risks today, being data, output risk, and external risks. So even if you're not using AI within your business, how could AI be used against you to harm you? Okay, but I don't want to spend too much. What I'd like to do and spend more time on is talking to you about some practical tools that you can take away and use to be able to manage and mitigate those risks. And those are AI impact assessments, which you may or may not already have heard of, but also AI contracting playbooks, which can be incredibly helpful in terms of managing your risks when you're talking about your commercial relationships. Okay, so I think the key and foundational risk, which you will all be aware of, relates to data. And everything in AI starts and ends with data. So what it goes in, what comes out, and what happens to that data along the way. Okay. So when we're thinking about data and when we're talking to our clients about data, the key things is to understand for us and for the clients that we work with the context, because data risk is highly context dependent. Okay, the risk profile of your use case will change depending on that use case and how you intend to use data and what data the tools are going to be using. Okay, so before deploying tools, when clients come to us for advice, we're asking the questions around what has the tool been trained on? Is this a proprietary data set that it has been trained on? Is it trained on non-proprietary data sets, but are they licensed? If neither of those are true, is it being trained on publicly available data? Is there a risk there for the organization based on the context that you operate in that we need to be thinking about? We also think about what data the inputs are going to be made into that tool. So users are going to put data into the tool to use it. What is that data? Is it, again, proprietary? Is it confidential? Is it personal information? Because each of those has a different risk profile that you'll need to assess. And of course, the data output. And I will talk about output risk a little bit later, so I won't get into that too much now. But you can imagine if you're going to be using output internally as opposed to public facing, there's quite a different risk profile related to that. Okay. So finally, we think about who's involved in the tools that you're using and what do their terms say. So lots of tech stacks these days are layered. So you're layered in terms of the tools and the tech that you're using. But what if there are layers of AI in there? Who's responsible for what layer? And what do their terms say? And what does each component pose in terms of a risk for your organization? Also, what use rights do these tool providers have? Obviously, you all know generally publicly available tools have much broader use rights for vendors. They can train on your data, they can keep your data, they can use it for other purposes. Now, obviously, there are controls for that we can think about. And these questions need to be thought about and answered before you start using the tools or before your teams start using the tools. And so what are the controls? What are the things that you can use to reduce that data risk to an acceptable level? We're very, we're very aware that risk is never, you're never able to zero risk out, but you can reduce it to an acceptable level, which is acceptable to your organizations in your particular context. So the things that we're thinking about is enterprise level tools. You would have all heard about them. These are tools that are designed for data protection in mind. Okay, so rather than the free versions, these are the enterprise level versions. You pay for them, you get an additional layer of protection. So they have things like data segregation in mind. They have contractual protections built in. So always looking for enterprise versions of your tools. Also, you may be able to, if context allows, prefer tools that are trained on proprietary data sets, okay, to eliminate that risk for you. And there are a number of providers out there who are offering tools that are trained on proprietary data sets. So if your context allows, perhaps you prefer those tools over other generic tools, okay? Where personal and confidential information does need to be inputted, because that's the whole reason why you want to use the tool, then ensuring that you have the appropriate consent. Have you been transparent with your clients and customers or the people that you're going to be inputting that data about into the tool? So that's another control that you can use. Obviously, configuring the tool, so not to train on your data, and your tech teams will be able to help with that. Toggling the fields that allow you to protect your information is a great way, is a great control to protecting your information. Think about who will see the output. Again, I'm going to cover output risks, so I won't go into that right now. But also, and finally, and probably most importantly, the human. In the first talk that we had this morning, the human was critical, and it is critical that you have human oversight over the use of these tools. And by human oversight, we're talking about governance, training, policies that your team are aware of, the guardrails that you train them on, and also the administrative controls that you have as leaders to, for example, delete prompts from tools that are accessing your data. So those controls can be used in terms of the data risk that can arise with some of these tools. In terms of the next risk that we're going to talk about, it's output risk. And by output risk, it's about what the AI tools actually produce and what you use and how you use it, and what risk does that pose for you. Obviously, even if you manage your input data risk really well, what you do, the output with the outputs that come out of the tool can expose user risk as well. So it's really important to think about that. So I'm going to talk about 3 of the key risks that come up. And the first is accuracy. And you would have all heard about hallucinations, right? These tools generating content that sound authoritative and correct, but it is wrong. Okay, that is a key risk. You're all aware of it, but from a legal perspective, for example, if you used output that was generated by the tool in your marketing content and it was incorrect, that is a potential Fair Trading Act issue. That could be misleading, that could be deceptive, right? So you need to be thinking about what goes out in that output and how is it used, okay, and what risk does that pose for you? I work in a professional industry with professional conduct rules. Many of you will have the same. And, inaccuracy, incorrect information and advice that I provide will have professional conduct breach obligations or breach risk for me. Okay. And so several of you may be in that position as well. So it's really important to get this right. And of course, AI generated content, if you use that with your customers, your clients, you may be contractually bound to it. I'm sure many of you in this room have probably heard about the Air Canada ChatGPT or chatbot incident. How many of you have heard about that issue that came up? Yeah, a number of you. So a passenger asked Air Canada's chatbot about bereavement fears after his grandmother died. And the chatbot confidently told him that he would be able to book a full fare and then apply for a discount, provided he does it within 90 days. Now, that policy did not exist. That was completely made up. So when he did apply for bereavement leave to Air Canada or to have a refund for that, Air Canada refused and then argued in court that the chatbot was actually an entirely separate legal entity to Air Canada. You can imagine what the court said. They rejected that argument entirely and said, actually, Air Canada is liable for all information that it puts on, whether it's on its website, whether it comes from a human, a static page, or a chatbot. And they were ordered to pay damages and costs to that individual. Now, that chatbot was confidently wrong, but the organization that used it or that deployed it was held liable for that, okay? So the court's message, I think, is really clear. You can't outsource your accountability to these tools. It's very, very important that you are standing behind them. So IP risk, again, this is probably well known to you. There's 2 kinds of risks you're looking at here. The infringement risk, and there are a number of court cases you'll be aware of in the US occurring right now around what the tools have taken to train, or what the providers have taken to train their tools, and whether that is a mass scale of copyright infringement, and also the outputs. Could they be potentially infringing? Okay, so there's 2 things you're thinking about there. But also in terms of the ownership rights, if you need to use that output, if you need to own it, then think carefully about whether the tools permit that. There are different laws around the world that apply in this situation. So it depends on where you want to use it and how you want to use it and what the tool provider's terms say. So you need to be aware of IP risk in that situation. In terms of privacy and confidentiality breach, which is the last one I'll talk about in this is about understanding what your teams are doing with these tools, having guardrails in place. So are they uploading proprietary or confidential data to those tools? Is it personal information that you don't have the right consents for? And understanding that, because if that happens, then you do expose your organization to risk. How many of you heard of the Samsung issues that came up when ChatGPT first came out? Yeah, a few of you. So when ChatGPT first came out, Samsung allowed their team to use it freely. And within 20 days, they had 3 different data breach incidents. And the issue is that or 3 different times, an engineer pasted proprietary source code into ChatGPT to debug it. Okay, a second engineer uploaded code for identifying defective equipment into ChatGPT, and a third employee recorded a confidential meeting and took an internal meeting note and then fed that into ChatGPT to provide a transcript. Now, in each of those cases, that was the generally publicly available ChatGPT. So it was not an enterprise level tool. They had no confidentiality protection around that data. There was no residency controls. There was no ability to delete that data once it was in. So Samsung banned the use of ChatGPT outright after that happened. They have brought it back in several years later, but it's under very strict controls. So the employees in that situation weren't being malicious. They weren't doing this to harm the organization. They were actually doing it because they thought that it would make their jobs faster, better, more efficient. So they were doing it to be helpful. And that's exactly why you need clear rules around this with your team members so that they understand the guardrails that you're comfortable with it as an organization and that they're working within those guardrails. So, controls that can be used. We've talked about data input in terms of risk that um, brings up, but data input also a really good way to reduce output at risk. Okay, so if you know and you have the right data that's going in, then output risk is probably going to be reduced. Probably not eliminated, but certainly reduced. Prompt training is incredibly important. How many of you have undertaken prompt training in your organizations? Yeah, a few of you, which is a really good start for your team. We did it earlier this year with our team with a full day workshop on it, and it was incredibly helpful because that is arming, not all prompts are made equal, and that is arming your team with what they need to be able to use these tools really, really well. So prompt training is something that that would be incredibly helpful, I think, for your teams. Mandatory human review, we've talked about this before, to check accuracy and ensure that the outputs are appropriate for use. And finally, tool terms. So you're thinking, and here you're thinking about, are the tool terms appropriate for your use case and how you want to use that output? If not, are they negotiable? Can you move the dial on that and build in some protections for your organization? Okay. Finally, in terms of risks, I just want to cover off external risks. So far, we've talked about what some of the risks that arise when you use AI within your own organizations. But I think something that's less well understood, but it is rapidly growing, is actually how bad actors can use AI to harm you and to harm your business, even where you're not using AI yourselves. So some of the things that we're seeing, and you might be aware of some of these things, is that people are using these tools to cause harm. And even if you're not using the tools, you need to be aware of these issues that are coming up and build them into your strategy, into your cyber policies and processes. So deepfakes and social engineering, you would have all heard about deepfakes, and you probably would also have heard about employees being duped into making large financial payments from their organizations as a result of deepfakes. How many of you heard of the engineering firm employee that made about a $25.6 million payment out of their organization as a result of this? Yeah. So what happened was there was a video call organized with him, his CFO, and a bunch of his team members. They all jumped on. They had a lengthy discussion, and as a result of that call, he was convinced the meeting was legitimate, and he transferred about 15 transfers, approximately of USD 25 million to I think 5 separate bank accounts. Okay. He only realized it wasn't real. The entire interaction was not real when he called into the office. Okay. Now, that employee did everything that you would expect from a reasonable employee to do. He verified that it was his team members visually. He scanned their faces. He saw faces he recognized. He heard voices he knew. Okay. And so that's the point, I think, is that this technology is allowing people to have these incredibly personalized attacks made, and that is a scary thing. And you need to be arming your team and your organizations about how to combat that. The other point there is prompt injection. How many of you have heard about prompt injection risk? Yes, great. So prompt injection is where, for example, if you use AI tools and AI agents to take actions on your behalf, what hackers can do is to hide malicious content inside those emails or the websites that that your tool is searching, or the files that it's looking at. And when it processes those things, it causes your tool, those prompt injections cause your tool to stop working within the guardrails, to ignore them in effect, okay, to leak data, to take unintended actions. And as AI agents and AI tools become more autonomous and you build them into your workflows, this risk is only going to increase. Okay. And finally, cyber incidents. We've talked about these already. Attackers can now craft highly personalized attacks, not just on your people, on your staff, but also on your customers and stakeholders. And so, and this is happening at rates that have been previously impossible, and at scale that has previously been impossible. So it's something that you really do need to be building into your cyber risk policies. Like with any other cyber incidents and cyber responses, it's really important to have the right controls in place, and that is a layered approach about what you need to do in terms of those controls. Obviously, your people and your process are critical, your human firewall, as they say. It is incredibly important. I've put some notes up there about what you could be doing in that space. Obviously, technical controls and AI controls also incredibly important, but also having a crisis response when it comes to that. What will you do if this ever happens to your business? Have you planned it? Have you had a war room? Have you had a session where you've actually lived through it, in an artificial way, but so that you are ready for it if it ever happens? And finally, board oversight, incredibly important. Boards should be building this into their risk matrix. They should be checking in with their leaders about how this is being addressed within the organization, and it needs to be a priority. So we've talked about risk. We will talk about AI impact assessments. So how many of you have ever worked with a privacy impact assessment before? A number of you. Okay, that's good, because AI impact assessments are very similar. So if you're familiar with AI or privacy impact assessments, then you will be familiar with this framework as well. What an AI impact assessment does, and it's been borrowed from that privacy governance. So it applies a template to each of your AI use cases, whether it's because you're developing a tool, whether you're procuring a tool, or whether you're deploying a tool. Okay. And the four things that you're thinking about when you're running these assessments is, what could go wrong? What could go wrong when I use this tool? So what are the different risks that could arise? Then you're thinking about, what are the consequences of that risk? What is the actual impact on your business, on your clients, on your team, on your stakeholders of if things go wrong? Then you're thinking about, okay, what are the controls and mitigations I can use to reduce that risk to a manageable level or to an acceptable level? What are you going to do about it? Can you do something at an organizational level, at a people level, at a contractual level with the vendors and the suppliers that you're working with? And finally, you assess, what is the residual risk that is left once I do that? And is it acceptable? Okay. Now, AI impact assessments, when we're working with clients, it gives them a really structured and documented way for AI decision making, and it's incredibly important. It's exactly what you need if you were ever faced or are subject to a regulatory scrutiny about what it is your organization has been doing, or when there's a dispute. It can be incredibly helpful. In terms of the final control I'm going to talk about, actually, we'll work through this first. So in practice, and this is an AI impact assessment in action. So as I said, identify the risks, depending on what the use cases, it'll be different for each of you and also different for each of your organizations depending on your context. So you identify the risks, then you think about the consequences. So this could be regulatory, it could be a loss of clients, but it could also be a loss to your clients. Okay. There could be financial loss, but also there could be reputational damage. So you need to think about all those risks. Then you're thinking about, okay, here's the use case, here are the risks, here are all the ways in which I can mitigate that risk or control for that risk. And so you're thinking about contractual protections, your due diligence that you can run on your AI tool vendor. You're thinking about your internal policies, processes, guardrails that you have for your team. And then you're thinking about the human review, the human oversight, the supervision, the human in the loop. Again, the goal is not to get risk down to zero. That is near impossible. The goal is to get it to an acceptable level of risk for your organization within your context. And each of you will have a different context and a different risk appetite. So it's important to undertake that assessment, to understand it. And the final practical tool that I wanted to talk about is an AI contracting playbook. Have you heard of playbooks before? Yes, a number of you. Sorry, I'm squinting because it is very bright up here. So an AI contracting playbook, an AI impact assessment, which we've just talked about, is about your internal risk governance framework. But the AI contracting framework and playbook is about your procurement, how you use your procurement and your contracting framework to manage AI risk through your external commercial relationships. Okay. So what is it? How do you do it? What are our other clients talking about when they're thinking about AI playbooks? So to create an AI playbook, what we're thinking about is identifying use cases within the organization where AI tools could be used or involved. So in the example I've given up there, vendors could be using it internally to provide services to you within your organization. But they could also be building these tools or developing or providing these tools so that you can use them yourselves internally with your teams or your customers. Or they could be building things for you that is going to be used in a customer-facing way. Okay, so you're thinking about all of those. Those are your use case assessments that you do. You then map those use cases against their risks. So for each of those use cases, there is a risk profile. Depending on your context, depending on your business and how you operate, there will be a different risk profile for each. You map those risk profiles. Then what you do in your playbook is to give your team guidance about what to do in each of those cases. Okay. And so you're thinking about how considerations for assessing the risk at each stage. Then you're thinking about, okay, well, if it is a medium risk use case, what should they be negotiating in their contracts? What should the contracts look like? What are the negotiation positions that your company can take? And what are some model clauses? You might even have model clauses in those playbooks that say, if this, then that. So very similar to coding, right? You can have playbooks that have built-in model clauses. Now, what we're also seeing our clients do is take these playbooks that we create and give them to trusted AI tools within their organizations so those tools can vet contracts and procurement documents that come in against those playbooks. Okay, it gives you a first cut to say, actually, this vendor or this tool meets my risk requirements, and therefore they'll progress to the next level. Okay, so hopefully that has given you a couple of practical tools to talk about. I'm going to close there, and I will be here for the day. So if you have any questions, just come and chat.